Congressman Wolf, you've been very vocal on the issue of Sudan and the genocide that's taking place in Darfur. Can you provide some background for that issue for people who may not be as familiar with what's taking place there?
Well, I've been to Sudan five times. My first trip was in 1989. In Sudan in those days, you had the Khartoum government in the north, mainly Muslim, coming against the south, what they call the Sudanese People Liberation Army, SPLLA. And they were mainly Christian, but some were animists and some were Muslim. And during that period, that fighting, which went on for about 15 or more years, there were 2.1 million people killed by the Khartoum government. And I went back a number of other times, met with the leader of the South, the Southern People Liberation Army, SPLA, John Garang, who later died about several years ago in an airplane crash, and saw how the world was sort of allowing these people to be killed. And the hunger, the famine, the sickness, the disease. I led the first delegation, there were two of us, to go to Darfur. I was the House member, and Sam Brownback, senator from Kansas, was the Senate member. And we spent time in Darfur where the genocide was taking place. And then it was just breaking into the news. There was not a lot on the news. Not many people knew very much about it. We would go into a camp where people had been there for months at a time. Very little food, very little medicine, animal feces, human feces all over the place. Then we go into these IDP camps sometimes where people who would walk for a week or two at a time were trying to get away from the Janjaweed. We also saw a whole series of burned out villages. We saw village after village after village after village that were burned out. What would happen is the government would fly what they call Antonov bombers. They're Russian-made bombers, would fly over the villages and drop the bombs. Then Soviet Hind helicopters, these are helicopters kind of with a dip in them, and they have Gatling guns on the side. It's just kind of the old Gatling gun. They would come in afterward and gunning down the people. And then the Janjaweed, men on horseback, we have pictures, we saw men on horseback when we were there, would come riding and screaming, hollering, come in, kill what men were that were there, loot the huts, burn the huts, and women and children would scatter and run and go away. And so having seen that, and of course 5 years later the genocide is still taking place. The Congress has called it genocide, the administration has called it genocide, the world acknowledges this is genocide, and it's still going on. And China is supporting the Janjaweed and the Khartoum government in this effort, and China will not stop. They will not use their influence, because China buys almost all of the oil from Sudan, will not use their influence to get the Sudan government to allow UN peacekeepers to come in, nor will they use their influence, which they have tremendous of. They have the largest embassy in Khartoum. They will not use their influence to urge the Khartoum government to stop arming the Janjaweed, the bad people. I mean, it's kind of out of a bad movie.
How did the people of Darfur react to your presence there?
Well, we were well received. They were glad to see that people from the Congress were interested, were there. They urged us to try to get the story out. I came back, and Senator Brownback and we held press conferences. We did a lot of things like that. I called Kofi Annan, who was head of the UN, and asked Kofi Annan to go. Secretary Powell then went after I did, and Secretary Condoleezza Rice has since been, but they were glad to see somebody was there to advocate for them, to speak out. I mean, here is something, genocide, really genocide. It meets the definition of genocide. It's been going on for 5 years, and it's still taking place. Today, at this very moment, genocide is taking place in Darfur and Sudan.
What are the options that the United States has here? You've mentioned international peacekeepers, of all the sort of the range of options that are somewhat used, economic sanctions or diplomatic pressure or actual peacekeepers. What options have been tried, and what would you advocate? And again, can you elaborate more on what China's role is?
Well, we have funded, most of the food for the people in Darfur is funded by the West, a large portion by the United States. China gives nothing. Strange. China has such influence, and a growing economy gives nothing. We have also funded, the West has also funded the money for the UN peacekeepers, what they call the so-called blue helmets. The Khartoum government will not allow the full contingent to be on the ground. And we have asked the UN to move ahead, and China keeps vetoing or blocking this up at the UN, nor has China been willing to put pressure on the Khartoum government, and one government that has the ability of putting pressure is China. And so therefore, all these things have been tried, and yet it continues to take place.